Hello, fellow humans. Today I'm going to talk about opinions, so very controversial. I'm sure, I don't know, I'm thinking this is the second one I'm recording, so I'm starting at the get-go pretty hard. It's technically Artvice, it's got some advice in. I'm showing you videos that I've watched of people whose opinions don't necessarily entirely overlap with mine, and kind of talking about how listening to other people with different opinions can widen your understanding, your belief in even what you think. So if there's someone who has a different ethical system to you, hearing them talk about their ethical system that is the opposite can help cement and give more depth to why you're not like that. And basically, just 4 examples of 4 times that I've watched some YouTube videos from a few people that I'm just like, our opinions don't entirely line up. I think this is an especially useful video, maybe, because of kind of how social media is used and how people respond in social media so immediately, and I'm sure it hasn't actually changed over time. I'm sure we're not actually worse at responding and understanding people. I just think that there is a lot of people as humans where we don't want to think further about people who we don't agree with, but also that when we are, seeing reports and seeing responses, it's the people who are loud with the stupidest ideas that we see, because someone having a rational, well thought out response, unless it's, some sort of a comedy, isn't really that interesting. So I guess I'm just gonna try to make some people a bit more boring. I'm basically splitting this into 2 halves. So one half is that some people just have different opinions. So either their opinion, they'll just interpret something differently. So you'll think, yeah, that makes sense. And somehow they don't understand it, or they don't process it in the same way. It just doesn't make sense to them. Or they're making a good argument, but you can tell that that they don't necessarily agree ethically, fundamentally on some aspects of perception. And kind of half in, half out is that sometimes you can agree with what someone's saying, or just understand what they're saying. You don't necessarily have to agree entirely, but be annoyed or just like not fully understand what they're saying because they're bad at that they're not arguing properly. They're not going into the depth necessary. They're not going into the intricacies of why they're thinking this. It can sometimes seem a bit out of nowhere. The first example is the shortest one. Now, I don't actually have a link for this one because it was ages ago, and I can't look back on my YouTube history to find it because I've watched a few. So randomly I came across this feminism cringe compilation. Now, I'm not entirely sure where this came up, but I was just listening to it whilst I did something else, and it caught my attention at one point because it was this feminism cringe compilation, and there was this woman in an interview and she was making sense. And I was just like, how is this cringeworthy? She is being level-headed, stating her opinion, rebuking your obviously pointed remarks, and basically kind of rebuking the kind of extremist feminism accusations that isn't really applicable to actual feminism. So as I'm sure you'll know, or maybe not, feminism is about equality, full stop. Feminism is not about man-hating. It's not about saying, oh, women have been put down for so long, that for us to be equal, men have to be put down for an equal amount of time. That's not equal, and that's not equality. I disagree. And so did this woman, but this was apparently cringeworthy simply because she was a feminist, or just that someone perceived this differently to me. Maybe they think that just the concept of being an actual feminist in itself is cringeworthy. So I found that very interesting. It made me learn more a little bit about how people can interpret things differently. But generally I just found it a bit strange. The second video is leaping quite quickly into a more controversial topic. So I came across this video by No Bullshit that was kind of arguing against the points given out in a BuzzFeed, yes BuzzFeed, you know where this is going, video on why, like, trying to live without black inventors. So obviously as time has gone on, where we can learn from their pottery, they can learn, obviously we're all learning, it's a global world, but historically, neither of these videos, the one that, the BuzzFeed one or the No Bullshit one, is really about that. So I want to call it the bull, so Mr. No Bullshit guy was going through it, like, they were pointing out that if black inventors didn't exist, if we didn't have any black inventors, we wouldn't be able to have, like, robots, what's the term? You know, lights, where you've got the red, green, orange and red lights. Without black inventors, we wouldn't have that. We wouldn't have microphones. We wouldn't have personal computers. We wouldn't have elevators. We wouldn't have lights. And he was kind of just breaking down how this wasn't true. So either they just patented a certain version, so there was already filament lights, or filaments for lights. However, this guy patented this one filament that was really good, so we use it when we have filaments, or it was kind of a middle ground starting block for what we use now. But also, well, which is, you know, kind of a bit silly. It's kind of breaking down that there wasn't loads of people of loads of races of every demographic that were creating these different competing ideas and trying to perfect this information and create something really great. It's kind of breaking it down into a thing of, like, black people versus, well, usually white people, but everyone else, which is ridiculous. And they kind of went on saying, like, you know, they couldn't have lights on because of that, and also that they co-patented, and they do admit that, it's kind of hidden in the BuzzFeed video, they co-patented one type of personal computer component or something, and obviously they weren't the only one, so without that black inventor maybe it would be slightly different, but it still exists. And it's kind of like diminishing what people have actually done to kind of prove your agenda, which is, you know, you have to kind of listen properly, like, well, and actually research, like No Bullshit has done, to not only listen to other people's arguments, but to analyse it and say, how much of this is true? How much of this is perception again? And how can I take this information and develop it myself into my opinions, my worldview, etc. Unfortunately, like, I was watching more of No Bullshit's videos, and it does make it a bit, when you see someone has not necessarily an agenda, but when someone has a very different ethical kind of worldview, it can make it a bit, it's also interesting to know that. As I watch more videos, he was obviously very conservative. I always get it, not Labour, conservative in his opinions, and didn't exactly line up with some of my opinions. did a video on SJWs and they're being offended by a poo. I've watched The Simpsons. A poo, it's a bit of a stereotype, but so with all of the Simpsons characters, realistically, it's not surprising. But I mean, in the same kind of thing, I'm reasonably offended by the representation of homophobia and emotional abuse, I think, of Rachel by Ross in Friends. So I'm not an SJW, but sometimes, but maybe because I don't like that, they would say, yeah, that I am this hysterical idiot being offended by everything. It's kind of like when they in Big Bang Theory, in an early episode, they had this little robot and was trying to get up skirt shots of Penny. That's disgusting, in my opinion. But maybe I'm just hyper offended. But it's still valid to listen to people who do think that you're a crazy SJW and why they think it's not offensive, because maybe I can develop my understanding of why it is offensive by counter-arguing why they think it isn't. So now we're moving on to delivery of argument and listening to people's perception. I was watching a video by Chaos55T because I quite like listening to kind of the art with commentary, criticism, gossip channels, kind of where a video where the audio it's essentially a podcast with a video to me. And I like watching it whilst I'm doing kind of things where I need to pay attention to what I'm looking at, but not what I'm thinking, so sewing or drawing or something, and I find it quite fun. And I found this video called, what is it? It's, Angry Parents Sent Me an Email Part 2. So this is Chaos and her friend reacting to and kind of arguing against this parent that was angry at Chaos for influencing their child and making them like a witch demon, which is obviously a bit silly. So we're listening, at least from my perception, there's kind of this hysterical parent, and then the reaction by Chaos. So some good arguments were made, some stuff that I agreed with, kind of analysis and criticism of what the father or parent was saying. So the parent accused them of releasing private information. They said that it was blacked out and no one else would know, and they didn't really understand how doxing went. Like, if you know one syllable of their name, one initial in their name, they'd be able to get doxed and find out who they are and blah blah blah. Now, this would be a problem if perhaps they, penned it out with and it was kind of semi-transparent, so even though it had been blacked out, you could still see an indent. However, this was done via email, so it was either blacked out or not. You'd have to be pretty silly to not make it an opaque block crossing out the name, which they did. And so basically the only way that publicly, like, someone could go after you is if you are publicly saying who you are, so as yourself on, like, Twitter or whatever, saying, oh, look at her, she responded to me, what a terrible person, like, how dare she, blah blah blah. In which case, they're the one doing it, well, they're the one releasing their information, and that would be a bit silly. And the next good point they made is kind of the Christian Bible bashing, kind of super American. I think it is something reasonably specific to the America as a thing, in that people will just kind of like have their one perception of Christianity and use any quote out of context to prove that homosexuals and drugs and whatever is, you know, sinful and horrible and you're a witch, you're going to go to hell and whatever. When they're not, in terms of actually like what the Bible says, they're not acting Christian. And they pointed this out using some quotes to, I think 3 good quotes to say, oh, you're saying this, but the way you're saying this is going against the Bible, you're not being a very good Christian, etc, etc. So, you know, they've done some research, they've responded appropriately, and it was great. Some of the later points, however, were not fully developed, in my opinion, or fully researched, and that can kind of kill your argument. Sometimes when people make arguments, you can say 100 really brilliant things that make a lot of sense, but if they find out you spell "there" wrong, you know, you're suddenly an idiot and everything you've said is discredited. And so it's really important to go into the research and go into full depth into why you're saying what you're saying. And I'm sure perhaps in this video you can find some points where I'm not going into enough depth, but I'm making an attempt. I've written out a script, I've rewritten it, I've re-recorded it, and not saying that she didn't, but we need to take more time to not only think of what we are thinking, but like how we're going to say it. And yes, I did not think enough about what I'm thinking of saying to say that. There's 2 main examples I found of this. Now, the first one was just kind of one sentence, one line saying kind of, the Pope is Catholic and you're Christian, and the Christian and Catholic are different things. Now, I don't think this was fully developed enough to be a like full argument. Because he's not saying, he might have said he's Christian, but when people are Catholics, they're Christian Catholics. They're still part of Christianity. So even if they are saying that they follow the Pope, they're still Christian. But you know, a lot of, in America, like most of the churches aren't Catholic, so they could, the father, the parent, could be saying nonsense and just trying to find a figure to threaten them with, in which case I think just kind of that a little bit more research, a little bit more of development is necessary for the argument to make a bit more sense. The second one was kind of near the end, done by the other person, the lizard person, and they said, do you not remember? So it was about the video, her videos, the father said, were saying that Christianity promotes rape or rape and murder, which, and then saying that that's terrible and, you know, would you stop lying? And she kind of sticks with it that they promote rape and murder, which, you know, you can interpret the Bible in 1,000 ways to perhaps prove that. But the 2 examples that were given by the friend were, do you not remember the crucifixion of Jesus Christ? He was murdered. That's a quote. And the other one was Cain and Abel. Now, if you've read if you know about the stories, then I would hope that you know that it wasn't, you know, perceived as a good thing to murder. In fact, people were kind of punished, and it was kind of perceived as like a very sad and bad thing that the brother and Jesus was killed. So I don't know where the point is with that. But it is still a point to be made. It just needs to use more valid examples in more depth. And that's something we need to do, or we don't need to do, but I think it makes you a better argumentative person, honestly. The last video that I'm going into is by ADV China. So this is a guy, an American and a South African kind of middle-aged, not, I was going to say married couple. They're not married to each other. They each have a Chinese girlfriend or wife, and they live in China. And I've been watching their little travels, and listening to their perceptions on Chinese culture and evidence of like how they don't care for their buildings and things like that. Just their interpretation of the culture and place, which I found very interesting, just because I've never been to China and I don't know. However, one video I came across, I kind of had this perception while I was listening that our ideas and our ethics or perceptions don't exactly line up. And I'm kind of going to go through it. So it was this video on kind of why people think that his wife is ugly and kind of the different beauty perception in China versus you know, Western culture. And they kind of said, I'll try to sum it up, saying that women are a commodity. And even when they went into like, there'll be white guys and their you know, Chinese girlfriends will be below average, to quote. But they kind of say afterwards that they don't know their personality and relationship, kind of like, if they had just said that that people have below average girlfriends, that would be offensive, because that kind of perceives that women as only value is their aesthetics, is their body, etc. And immediately after saying that, they said that this isn't all that women are, and kind of, you know, making my argument for me. And then kind of how living in China changed their own opinion on aesthetics. So like where a Chinese woman would be, you know, really attractive, because they know of or they perceive the stereotype and the interpretation that women are better when they have like lighter skin and like nicer clothes and certain expectations for being an attractive Chinese woman. Like he changed like his perception so that it kind of fits the environment now. Now the first time I watched this, or I think even the second time, I perceived this weird undertone, or kind of just that my interpretation of a role of a woman is slightly different from what they think the role of a woman is. But I mean, on my third time watching it, when I was picking out all their points for this, I kind of didn't have that interpretation anymore of how they were saying things. So I can't really make that argument. I think it's just interesting seeing a perception into a different culture and a different person from a different culture's perception of a different culture. And it just kind of widens your horizon to know more things and listen to people, I guess. So that's not a very exciting end to this. We went from feminism to racism to Christianity to religion, and then just kind of a nice end of me being, I perceived this differently initially, but as I watched more videos and I kind of, in a weird way, got to know them, I now perceive it differently. Like I can understand them a bit more, I think. And yeah, ADV China, I actually really like their videos. Feel free to watch them. I'm giving a link to all of the videos I'm referencing. So thank you guys. See you next time. Thank you, come again.